Good morning, everyone. You know, I grew up in church. One of the things I find potentially disturbing is that when I see people in church not doing wrong, but they're not doing right either. Take for instance, it is easy to see people avoiding grave sins, fulfilling their Christian's obligation as Sunday churchgoers, but they're not really interested in staying back in church, encouraging one another, enjoying the communion of saints, and so on. And honestly, I always struggle with preachers who preach a message that is not wrong, meaning to say doctrinally sound, but it is not a message that cut to the hearts of people and getting them to renew their life thoroughly. With that, you will slowly see people getting lukewarm about God. Before long, people will just be fulfilling their Christian obligations without true Christian convictions. Carrying the cross, going the extra mile to love, to care, to painstakingly walk the sinners out of their sins will no longer be the concern of most people. Instead, most Christians will end up just wanting to come to church to be happy. They will want church life to be fun and enjoyable, and this is where church leaders will slowly relent and fill their church with programs and activities to excite. And honestly, it is not surprising now for believers to feel reluctant going back to physical church gathering even when they are allowed to. Why? Because with the pandemic, the church is now stripped naked of its glamour, glittering lights, and emotion-stirring music. What is only left now is the gospel, which if it's not proclaimed, the sheep of God will remain lost, poor, and naked. Now, how did this happen, you ask? Because in all these years of peaceful and prospering times for the church, we have settled for what is not wrong, yet it's not right either. We have accustomed ourselves to fulfilling Christian obligations without convictions. Now, if there's one thing that the pandemic has done us Christians anything good, I would say it has critically taught us something very paradoxical. That is, what is not wrong doesn't mean right. You see, we are now constantly being persuaded, don't do wrong, don't break the law of social distancing, don't be socially irresponsible. We have to do things that are morally, ethically, and socially accepted as a Christian. But may I ask, what is the true concern of God? Are we really taking care of the sheep of God? Are we responsible as a shepherd, as a church leader, as a fellow Christian? Do we encourage one another to live by faith instead of just following scientific guidelines? Do we encourage each other to be God-abiders rather than law-abiders? I think in this pandemic, God is looking out for people who do the right thing instead of just avoiding the wrong things. Well, I know it's not easy, but we must keep praying to be led by the Spirit. Now, as you know, we are a church first hit by the coronavirus in Singapore. By right, we should be really afraid of physical gathering. But as soon as we are allowed to gather, we started gathering. We dine in small groups of 5 to encourage one another. Well, some may say this is socially irresponsible. We should have waited for the vaccines or at least wait for the whole situation to simmer down. Now, we are not testing the threshold on purpose, but as it is, the sheep of God needs it. They yearn for it. They gather in faith and joy, so who are we to place judgment? How is your fear going to dictate someone else's faith? But it's surprising that Christians who are used to living with obligations without true convictions are showing their true beliefs. They don't understand spiritual needs. They only understood societal acceptance and ethical code of conduct. Now, let me point you to what the Lord Himself has taught all believers. Should we turn to Matthew chapter 16, verse 21. From that time on, Jesus began to explain to His disciples that He must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things at the hands of the elders, chief priests, and teachers of the law, and that He must be killed and on the third day be raised to life. Now, do you realize that one of the hardest things we face in life is to speak against the spirit of man? Especially when we know that some people have their sets of ideals or their way of thinking which is so persistent. And here, presumably, the disciples didn't thought Jesus had to die to reign as king. You see, my brethren, as with the human nature, we always miss the cross. In our pursuit of victory, we always want to avoid the way of submission. But Jesus spoke against that kind of spirit, that kind of thinking, which is now so prevalent in the disciples' heart. But look at what happened next. And Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. "Never, Lord," he said, "this should never happen to you." And Jesus turned and said to Peter, "Get behind me, Satan. You are a stumbling block to me. You do not have in mind the concerns of God, but merely human concerns." Now that was quite a stunning rebuke, isn't it? But I guess it was needed. Now let's ask the question, is there anything wrong with what Peter has so passionately reprimanded Jesus about? "No, this should not happen to you, Lord. Don't even think about it." No, there's nothing wrong morally or ethically. I mean, Peter was telling Jesus, how can you let yourself be killed? And obviously there is nothing wrong humanely. I mean, it's not humane to let a kind man die such a terrible death, isn't it? And there is definitely nothing wrong relationally. We know Peter loved Jesus as his teacher and as his closest friend, and out of love, he doesn't want Jesus to suffer such a tragic death. So whichever way, it just doesn't make sense to Peter. He seems to hit all the right note in his reprimanding of Jesus. Yet Jesus said something that is most offensive. "Get behind me, Satan. You are a stumbling block to me." Now, Satan, who insinuated Peter's mind, was mentioned here. And what is Satan most famous for? He is the most evil and subtle one who uplifts every concerns of man. He gives way to all human ethics, morals, values, law, love, and relationship, such that there is nothing in the human senses that can oppose it. But the only thing that he purposely missed out is the concern of God. So Satan can cause you to think and feel right in a human sense, yet you can just miss the very things of God in the midst of it. So my brethren, think about this pandemic. It is a great opportunity for you to be critically challenged about what you have so strongly hold on to. Some say, hey, let's not gather physically, it's dangerous. Some might say, hey, let's be law-abiders. Some might even say, hey, let's meet through Zoom will do. I'm staying with my old parents. I don't want to endanger them. Well, those views are not wrong. I can't fault you. But you may not be right either, at least in the eyes of God. My brethren, before you are so sure about what you believe in, ask yourself carefully, what is the concern of God? What do you think God is most concerned about right now? I wouldn't want to end up being right before all men, yet wrong before God. That earns me nothing.